Lacrosse Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV Channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. Now, joining us on this beautiful show, Pat Differ, young buck, just retired recently from lacrosse. He's a Hall of Famer. And, of course, our co-host, Gary Groob. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Good to see you, Pat.
Hey, welcome, Pat.
Well, it's nice to do this, fellas. I really appreciate the chance to say hey and, across just about any time. So it's nice.
All right, let's start with the most important question. What brought you to lacrosse? How did it all start?
I was 7, and I grew up in Ontario, and there was a neighbor of ours who played Junior A lacrosse. His name was Joe Hoare, and he was a captain of the team that, as kids, we all wanted to play for, the Mississippi, those days, Toronto Township PCOs. At that time, maybe just a little after that, being 9 or 10, we would go and watch the Oshawa, the teams in the Junior A League that year with really Oshawa's dominance. Nobody else really won, but Joe was a player that I played catch with in the backyard, and got me really my first stick was one of his old ones, and it was just really something that I took to right away, because it was a simpler time and there was really no place else I'd rather go than to the lacrosse box and just fire the ball around. And, friends from those days are still friends today.
What is it about lacrosse that's like that? The family type respect that everybody has for each other?
I don't know exactly what it is, but I think that there's an element of the game that, with the story of how it started with the North American natives and the I guess history of it, as far as that type of a thing. For me, it was something I was always interested in, and the game has a way of growing on you and teaching you things, skill-wise, and friends and opponents. And I always had the feeling that lacrosse looked tougher than hockey or many sports. But playing it, I never felt that. I always felt more confident, more stable, and more appreciation for what it was we were trying to do. And fighting really wasn't a part. It was there, but it wasn't really as much of a heralded part of the game as it ever was in hockey. And the knock them down, get up in the corner, run down and defend your end type of a mentality is the way we were all taught to play. Mm-hmm. And it just grows on you.
What I'm hearing from you is that the physical nature of the game of lacrosse, when you're actually in it, it's not as physical as some may think watching it. Is it because of the physical nature of the game is not really, like when you slap a guy's hand that's covered in a glove, that might look, real dangerous, but it in fact isn't. So in essence, the violent nature of the game is more of a visual thing rather than a factual, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's exactly what I meant, was that the game looks a certain way, and yet to actually be on the floor playing it, it doesn't, the slashing remember now, back in my day, or our day, people my age, we all had wooden sticks, and I mean, we had the plastic Bakelite on our arm pads that we would tape on, and you would hear that when the wood, but you'd really get to a point where you'd be changing those between periods because they'd be broken. It was physical. There was a lot of physical stuff, but it was more of a controlled physical that was something that could be managed. You dished it out in your own end, and then you took it in the other end, and that was just the way it was. And to play it, I've always said that just mentioned was that it looks to a normal viewer awful, and yet it didn't ever feel anywhere near that. It felt a lot more unstable and a lot more at risk with skates on than I did ever standing on my runners, and being able to defend myself that way. But there was lots of stick swinging and lots of different things that that were probably close to being about as bad as how they looked.
You get hit by a wooden stick.
To me, it was an easier game to play.
Right. You say you get hit by a wooden stick and you'll know it. There's no two ways about it. It's not like the as John Grant calls it, the Tupperware that they use now.
No, and you know what? There was a respect there because of that. I mean, you put pads in certain places, and again, all the equipment and everything was so different. I mean, I'm surprised we have any fingers left at all. But the truth is that guys like me, Higgs, and guys that were real tough lacrosse players without really even having a fight, they could break your wrist with a 2-foot slash, and you had to learn to keep your distance and to stay away from things like that, and to put your body in a position where your equipment or your pads would absorb most of the contact. There's a lot of moving parts to being a good lacrosse player, and today the kids are so skilled, but it is a different game, and I think from a physical nature, it's almost it is less dangerous than it used to be with a wooden stick because of the severity of what you could do with it. But it's not certainly any less skilled. In fact, it's probably more skilled and quick and everything today. That the game, when I watch today, I mean, I'm sore just watching it. But the nature of the game is different than when cross checks and slashing was just the way you played defense. So with a wooden stick, you can do some damage with that. And I just think that for the betterment of the game and to try to get kids to play and like that, it's a less violent type of a game today with respect to injury.
Yeah, it's a lot like I remember growing up that I used to wait on the weekend for the weekend newspaper to use as shin pads because the weekly version wasn't as thick.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you just look at my face. We never even wore face masks. I mean, you could tell. Just look at me. And there was lots of stitches and lots of cuts, and the ball's always around your head when you.
Oh my God!
I mean, it was just we didn't hardly even. I mean, I started before we even helmets, and so you think about all of that, and it's almost comical today to think that you would send your kid out to play a game like that and not even have a helmet on, but that's the way it was.
I think you're we're reminding ourselves. I think the three of us know this already. That with the advent of more and more protection that players get to wear, more and more liberties are taken as far as going afoul of the rules or I don't want to use the word attempt to injure, but the opportunity for injuries are much higher because we have this what I'll call the just basically people thinking they're invincible and they can't be.
Yeah, they're braver. They're braver because of that, Frank. I think
the suits of armor that they're wearing.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to a point where we knew where the boundaries were, and we knew. And there were dirty players, and there were guys like in every era of every league. There's things players are known for certain things. Yeah, right. And so we learned how to play that way.
Now you were a great two-sport athlete too, because you were an excellent hockey player. You even went to the Detroit Red Wings camp. So
yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about that too, for more of a well-rounded idea. When you were playing lacrosse, you had that hockey mentality too.
There's a long list of players that are, I guess, thought of as hockey players that also played lacrosse. And it seemed to be the perfect complement for hand-eye coordination. And during the summers, hockey wasn't being played. Just a long, long list of guys. And when I started, hockey was a given, lacrosse or baseball, whatever you wanted to play. Not so much soccer when we were kids, but a lot of it now were your choices in the summertime. And after you got to be on competitive teams and traveling teams or whatever they're called, all-star teams, it
Right.
became tough to play both hockey or lacrosse and baseball. Say that's how I was, and then I gave up baseball and just stuck with lacrosse. But yeah, I played a little bit of hockey with Duffy McCarthy and different people that I grew up with, and I went over to Europe to play. I was talking to my buddy Rick Drennan the other day, who was a sports writer in Ontario, about the 70s being sort of my time. We all have our decade, for example, when we're at our best, and 68 to maybe 79 or 1980s when I stopped playing lacrosse. But I had an experience in Europe playing hockey after I got out of junior hockey in Ontario. I went to St. Catharines camp and played for the Beehives in Toronto area, and then went over to Europe to play. And I played in Holland in Tilburg, which was probably a pretty good senior level of hockey. And we played the Soviet national team in 1971, the exact same team that played Team Canada in 72. And I have a stick on the wall I'm in my shop here. I have a stick on the wall in my warehouse that we traded because they're all the Soviets at that time. If you look back at the films that were just on CBC, a lot of them didn't even have gloves that matched. It was just the equipment was hard for them to come by. So they'd trade us their sticks made in Russia, and we would trade them a Koho because that's what we would have. And they'd go around all the games that they played to try to get better equipment from people. So, for me to have that experience, we played them once in Tilburg and once in Utrecht, and they beat us pretty bad. I mean, I didn't take long to figure out how guys were, the way they moved the puck around and how strong they were. But I played a fair bit of hockey and was happy to do that. And then the pro league started in 74 and 75 in lacrosse. And, you go through a period in your life, at least I did, and a lot of us did, where we didn't really have yet a family or a steady job or anything like that. And we just went where lacrosse was. And in the winter, I would go and play hockey somewhere. So there was a few years like that. But after a while, and there's no real big money back then, anything. And after a while, as soon as you get serious with a girl, usually she's the one that smartens you up and says, well, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? That's what really most of us fall into that category. We would, play lacrosse forever. But when you start having kids and, you need to get a job, it's time to move on.
When you talk about playing against the Russian national team and talking about how they played, I guess you're one of the people like me that knew the NHL was in tougher than they realized.
I had John Ivoni come to the house because I came home for Christmas.
The Sun
I had bruised a kidney. Yeah. John came to our place in Port Credit, and he sat down with me because at that time in 1971, there wasn't really a whole lot of Canadians over there playing in Europe. And the coach, one of the Beehive coaches, Tony Callum, called me and asked me if I was interested in coming to Europe to play hockey. And of course, I just said sure because he called me on a Tuesday, and Friday I was over there. And he asked me about what it was like being over there and what it was like playing the Russians. And it was Soviet Union, I guess, at that time. But I said to him that I remember clearly saying to him that these guys are a lot better than everybody thinks they are, and it's going to be a tough series. And I think Canada will win. And that's, I don't want to just sound like that, but that's exactly, we all thought Canada would win. But I knew it wasn't going to be a cakewalk. And so John wrote a little article about what it was like, and I think at that time it was hard for Canada to play an international competition because they wouldn't go because the pros couldn't play, or whatever the deal was.
Father Bauer was
the coach. Yeah, and it was, it was an experience. Milov and Yakushev and Maltsev, Vasiliev. It was exactly that team with maybe a guy or two added at the end. But playing those guys was always like playing Globetrotters. All you did was chase them, and they always had the ball. Always had the puck, I guess, and they were strong. I mean, they were so strong.
Physically, they were. They're off field. They were the ones that taught North Americans off field regimen, right?
As well as all rounds.
Yeah, and that experience was good for hockey. It was because, for Canada, it's good because we won, but it was just that close that, we might have lost just the same. So at the end of the day, that changed the game, and it really helped everyone understand the importance of conditioning. And the guys that Canada had on the ice went into that thing probably in the worst shape of they've just spent drinking beer and having fun and working summer jobs. And it took them, I think they knew halfway through the first game that they were in big trouble. Right. And then as it went on, how much credit can you give them to pull that together and to be competitive over there and win 3 out of 4 games? It's just an amazing story. And when I watched that CBC special over the last little while, the 4 episodes, it brought back a lot of memories, because I can remember clearly being on the ice against those guys, and we sat up in the stands and watched them practice, and we'd be shooting on the goalie and doing stops and starts and all the things that Canadians were doing at the time practice-wise in hockey. And these Soviet guys went out on the ice, and it was like a symphony. They had 5 drills going on at once. Nobody missed a pass. They were zipping up and down. It was like I didn't even understand what I was watching. I said to our coach, I said to Tony, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. I said, I think this is, they were so good that it was scary. And we got out on the ice, and that's exactly the way they played. All we did was chase them.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to talk about how good they were, how important was it for you, and how did it affect your lacrosse life, having pulled out that experience of seeing how they prepared for the game? They played the game of hockey like basketball, which a lot of people say lacrosse is played a lot like basketball. Yeah. Did you at that time see that relationship with the way they played? They played as a 5-man unit. We here played, offense, the forwards and the defensemen, they were separate. They played kind of together, but not like the Soviets did. Their way of playing hockey is a lot like the way lacrosse is played. And did you see that correlation, or is it something that you think developed after that?
It was instantly noticeable how they cycled, and today everybody talks about cycling and things like that. The Soviets were doing that a long time ago, and it's very much like lacrosse, picks and rolls, and they would go back over territory rather than shoot the puck in or dump it in. They would move back and in the same zone, and not really even think about staying on their wing, for example, and moving up and down the ice in that way. They played the game a different way, and I noticed that immediately. And as far as what that did for my outlook, it made me a lot more serious about playing hockey. Until that point, I had always played whatever I'd played more for fun. And we didn't grow up with the same amount or same regimented type of coaching and off the ice or off the floor training. And these guys were athletes first and foremost, and everything they did, there was a purpose to it. The guys on Team Canada, and to some degree just about every team I ever played on, I mean, when you played the game, it was time to be serious. But other than that, you weren't really an athlete anymore. You were out doing what you did to have fun. And it's different today. All of these kids in the NHL, and watch them, their nutrition is perfect. They don't carry on the way we used to. I mean, with the odd exception, they probably do. But I mean, the whole thing has changed. It's become, it's out of style, and you probably won't make a team if you're not in shape today, and you don't go to training camp to get in shape. All of that changed after that Soviet series, and for the better. Really, it's made everybody a better athlete. The kids today that get coached in Pee-wee and then, 12, 14-year-olds, the terminology isn't that anymore, Pee-wee or Bantam. It's all under 15, under 12, or whatever it is, you this, you that. And so, but these kids that are, I'll say Pee-wees because that's the way I remember them, but they're 12 and 13 years old, and they're coached like NHLers. I mean, in terms of the way how important it is to be in shape. That all, I think, really stemmed from that Soviet series.
Sure.
Yeah, well, we as a society, I think it also is a reflection of our societies. And again, lacrosse is more of a team sport where you play together. At that time, hockey was very individualistic. Where but I have to say, Mr. Diff, I don't think we would have beat the Russians if we tried playing the way we're playing now. I think it was the individualism of the Canadian players that won eventually. It's the only way you can explain a guy like Henderson who did very little in his hockey career and ended up that great. He had an individual talent, a specific talent that the team helped him, get to perform. So, yeah, those were great memories. But I wanted to stick to the lacrosse part. Gary, go ahead. Just that,
Sure.
It's amazing that you have the hockey thing so deeply rooted and mixed in with your lacrosse being. Gary, let's go back to lacrosse. I know you have some great questions for him.
Well, sure. Yeah, I was going to talk about, it's around 73, I guess you moved to the West Coast. You got out of Ontario. If you went to the West Coast to play for Vancouver, the Burrards. Let's talk about that and that league at that time with the Western Lacrosse Association. Guys like Dave Durrani, Wayne Goss, and some of these great stars of the era.
I'd come out of junior in 72. It was my last year of junior, and they were graduating. You graduate in junior, and the general manager, Bob Perry of the Burrards, was in Toronto on business, and he phoned me. And he said, "I'm Bob Perry from the Vancouver Burrards, and I'd like to talk to you coming out to Vancouver to play lacrosse next year. Would you be interested in that?" And I said, like I sort of always said, "You want to go to Holland to play hockey? Sure. You want to go to Vancouver to play lacrosse? Sure." Morley Kells had drafted Billy Foote and I out of junior because we both went overage the same year. Mm-hmm. And so the Ontario guys had their draft, and Footy and I were going to Brantford to play on that juggernaut team with Dudley and Ron McNeil. And I mean, the Man Cup teams of the early 70s that Brantford had. So we were going to go down there, and well, if we made the team, we were going to play. But when the phone rang and it was Bobby, Bruce Todman, myself, and Billy Sheehan, who played in Montreal in the Pro Go, Long Branch boy, met at a restaurant in Toronto. And Bobby told us that he had a spot for all of us on the team if we wanted to go. Billy Sheehan decided that he didn't want to go because he was one of the few guys that actually had a job. And I said, "Sure, I'll come." And I forget. And Todman said he would come. And Bruce went out with Gaylord Powless, and Bruce played for Vancouver, and Gaylord played for Coquitlam. Mm-hmm. And when Billy Sheehan said no, Bobby says, "Do you know anybody else that I should call?" I said, "You should phone Billy Foote." And so Foote he said, so I went out to Vancouver, drove across. It was the strangest thing because I'd never really been out there before. I was just 21 years old, coming out of junior, and drove across Canada in February. And it was minus 30 or 35 going across the prairies. And my buddy and I drove out there, and we turned the corner by Hope, anybody that's been out west, and get into the Fraser Valley. And all the grass was green and the flowers were up. And this is in February. And I'm wondering if we made a wrong turn or what. It was minus 30 the day before over in Alberta. And I had no idea how nice it was out in Vancouver as we got into town. I mean, the mountains and the ocean. And so that's what took me out there. Bobby says, we'll get you a job. And life is funny like that because the job that he got me was at Point Grey Golf Course. And I'd like to be, I like to play golf, and I cut grass, and I got a job for the summer, and it allowed me to play lacrosse, and it, it was all done through lacrosse, opportunity knocks, and so a short period after that, after the back and forth of the pro league in New York or in Quebec City, I went back to Point Grey to settle there because really that was probably the first job I'd ever had in my life where it was some sign of a future. And the next thing I know, I was a superintendent of the golf course. And I ran the private golf course in Vancouver. And the rest of my golf time with respect to business and everything on for 30 years was a result of that. I mean, all through lacrosse, opportunity knocked, and that's how it all happened. And so Footy and I came out and we won out west that year, and we went back to play in the Mann Cup against Peterborough. They beat Morley's team, which was an upset, but Pat Baker and Johnny Davis and some of the young guys that were my age at that time, those two were older, but Wasson and Grant, that was their first year of junior, and that's how far back we go in things like that. That was 1973. It was a one-game final. Wow. No best 4 to 7. It was like a CBC thing. They were going to play one game, and Peterborough beat us 9-5. Yeah.
Well, sorry, Frank. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that. Is that where you get this? I noticed I was looking at your, looking a little bit, researching you a little bit, and you've got this fondness for grass, and I mean the stuff that you play golf on. By the way,
the turf.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the other stuff, but I spent my whole time out here growing grass on a golf course. And after I'd finished doing that, I started a business. My wife and I started a business, and it grew across Canada. In 2008, we sold it, and I mean that's Duffy McCarthy said to me, like, how do you because Duffy had a business as well. He had a contracting business, and here's a couple of us fatheads that got hit in the head too many times without a helmet on, and we both ended up having successful businesses and running them. And Duffy says, well, what did you like? What do you think the secret is, making it in business? I said, you know what it is, Duff? You just go in the corner and get the ball. That's exactly what it is. You go in the corner, get the puck, you go in the corner, get the ball, and it doesnesn't matter if you hook and hold a little or as long as you come out with the ball. I said, that's the secret to running a business. And so, that's, it's opportunity is there, and sport offers that. And it did for me.
Now you touched upon the professional league. I want to delve in a little bit more. The NLL in 1974, and how did this come about? And how did they get a hold of you to join them? Because you wound up in Syracuse in your first year.
I was out in Vancouver because I'd gone there to play in '73,
right?
With every intention of staying, and then I think it was Chris Fudge who called me.
Oh.
And said something about there was a draft, and I was drafted by Syracuse, and Jim Higgs was on the team, and Gaylord Paulus, and I went, wow. I mean, those are two of the best lacrosse players in the game. I mean, at the time and before. So and it's a professional league, and he told me like where the teams were, and would you be interested in coming back to play? And so this is the third time somebody says, you want to go somewhere and play? Oh, sure. So I went there. And,
Right.
and Hicksy was going to be the coach, and Richie Moran was going to come out of Cornell to coach us because that was a big name around Syracuse and Ithaca and all that. And but Higgsy was organizing everything. And the funny thing is, I got 100 stories, but the funny thing is, Higgsy said to me, we drafted this kid out of junior C, and he scored 100 goals, but he needs a ride, to Oakville. I lived in Port Credit. So that's about a 15-minute drive from Port Credit to Oakville. And I said, sure, can you pick him up? And I said, sure. Where does he live? And Higgsy says he lives in Orangeville. And I said, Orangeville? I said, geez, that's like North Pole compared back then, 1974. And the Anderson. Talking about funny. I drive all the way up to Orangeville to pick this kid up. He's sitting on the side of the road bouncing a ball like this. And he gets in my car, and I looked at him, and I said, how come you need a ride? What happened? Did your tractor break down? I said. So, that's how Terry Sanderson came to be
that's
in.
Amazing.
I mean, nobody.
It's funny the lifelong friendships that you guys form. Because I remember when Terry passed, one of the most moving letters that I read was yours about your past with him. And
I did a tribute. Yes, I did a tribute to Terry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did a tribute to Terry because he was one of those special people. And I mean, he had a kid then, Susan, and Terry had a little girl, Carrie. And in Syracuse, we all lived at the university. And Terry and I remained like lifelong friends. And it was a sad day when I heard that news. And, he was relatively young, like as I guess, time goes. But, that was a very sad day, yeah.
Chris Rudge, the CEO of the Winter Olympics?
Yep.
Yeah. Gary,
Reggie and I, he's older. So I say older, I don't mean that in any way. I just mean that, Higgsy and all of these guys that we play against each other mentally as juniors, and you have your age limit at 21. So it's how many years have you been gone out of junior? And Reggie was probably, he's like, I'm 71 now. He's probably 76. Somewhere in there. So I would never have played against him. And Chris said the only reason he got drafted by Syracuse was they thought he was his brother Dave. Dave was a really good player, and Chris wasn't that good. But anyway, Reggie and I just finished in 2019 coaching that Costa Rica team, trying to help them out in that World Box Championship. So Chris lives down in Costa Rica half the year now. And he's had a tremendous business career, and he always seemed to fall into something and just come out smelling like a rose. And that's Reggie. So he's continuing that today. He just called me last week, and we're going to go down in January to spend some time with him. But Reggie's another guy that just seems to be able to change and adapt. When he wasn't making it sort of as a player, he was an extra guy in Syracuse, and he didn't make the team in Quebec. He became the director of player personnel and spoke French just like that, and got a job at Quebecor after that because he was the general manager of the Caribou, and he just parlayed that into a global job. He flew all over the world buying companies and things like that. He had to work a room, Chris Rudge, and he makes the best out of every situation he's in. And so, we have lots of laughs over that, I tell you.
This isn't about Chris Rudge, like the show's not about Chris Rudge, but I just want to remind you that we're Argo fans, by the way. We follow the Toronto Argo.
Well, there you go. We got a ring.
Lots of dealings with Chris Rudge.
That's why I said, do you remember who Chris Rudge is? Chris Rudge in 2012, after the Olympics, the 2010 Olympics, he moved over to the Argos. Braley in BC owned the team. He brought him here to Toronto, and he ran the Toronto Argonaut franchise and organized the 2012 Grey Cup festival, which was one of the best festivals
He
that I,
did.
I
Yeah,
recall. And
ever.
and
Yeah.
you know, and nobody expected anything
That-
good out of Toronto. So Chris Rudge, when you talk about Chris
Yeah.
Rudge, and you talk about him being an opportunist and a person who really can reinvent himself on a dime, literally on a
Yeah.
dime. I'm not even
Oh yeah.
exaggerating.
We
Yeah,
know
I
that
know
very
a
well.
little bit. Not I don't know him that well, but Gary and I enjoyed the 2012 Grey Cup, and he was an important. He had nothing to do with running the team, the actual team, but the organization
Right.
benefited from his existence and him doing things. So I'm glad you mentioned him, and the people who follow us know about the Argonauts and know about the
Mhm.
Canadian Football League. So that's just
Well,
a little.
that's great. I didn't. I'm not a name dropper to say, but I know that Reggie was a big part of. He became the person that basically ran the Quebec
Right.
Caribou, and Mito was our coach, and that was after just an awful year. And I've done some things for Dave Coleman down in New Jersey for his website as well, writing some articles, trying to remembering those times and the impact that it had on different people. And when we played in that league for the 2 years, Johnny Grant, Jimmy Watson, all of those guys would say the same thing. It was the best 2 years of lacrosse we ever had. And as it moves on, a lot of that group that came from that league played together in that 78 team that went over to England. And when we somehow or other, that happened. But I mean, all the people that were involved in these experiences during, like I mentioned before, like my sort of decade of the 70s, remain really good friends. And we revisit some of those days regularly as we can, because it's always fun to do that.
It's gone on, as Gary and I have attested and witnessed to. The previous commissioner came out of soccer, out of European football, to run lacrosse, the National Lacrosse League. Now we've got one that came from
NASCAR.
NASCAR F1. Sorry, NASCAR.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing that lacrosse. There's a lot of survival when it comes to lacrosse. It hasn't been an easy sport to keep moving. We've seen it go ebbs and flows,
Not at
up
all.
and
Yeah.
right. And you're basically somebody, you're talking about the 70s. Lacrosse was in its heyday around that time, right? And you've
Well,
seen it.
I think that it was. Players were such that you had the Gaylord Pauluses, and I keep mentioning him, or the Higgsies, the Paul Suggets. I mean, every team in that NLL, players played both ways. It was up and down, and knock them down and get up again. I think every generation would have their own feelings about the quality and the caliber of when they played, and it's really, but that stemmed from my experience right from when I started playing junior A. I played 5 years of junior A from 68 to 72. And a lot of those guys that were on the Green Gales or the Lakeshore team of 70 and the Peterborough teams of the early 70s, I mean, those were classic years for talent and the competitive nature of the game. I mean, we all just played. Nobody was making a lot of money, and nobody really thought twice about going somewhere. When that 74-75 league came, to be able to go into the Forum in Montreal or the Boston Garden or any of those places, that's a treat, even today, for a lot of us that did.
In hockey, especially.
Jim Wasson said that when we had him on the show. He was talking about how the league now is striving for all the things that you guys had back then. The big venues, the Maple Leaf Gardens, Forum, Boston, 48 games, almost a full-time schedule, decent pay for the era. All the things that you guys are striving for, or they're striving for now, is you guys had. And then, of course, we have what John Grant said was it's like winning the lottery and then losing the ticket when the thing folded in 75, after 75.
Yeah, I try to remember my feelings at that time. And I remember getting the news because I think I was basically expecting to go back to Quebec City. It was the
Hmm.
spring, I think, and not really too far before when the season or training camp would have started that the news came out. And so, it had been obviously festering and stuff like that. But I was refereeing hockey by this time
Right.
after playing all those years. So I was busy in the winter doing that and then getting ready for the summer and going to the gym and working out and doing all that. But at the same time, all of that stuff when it folded, the first thing I did was headed back out to Vancouver.
Right.
Because I had my job at the golf course still. The guy said, I'll keep it for you. Um, and I just came back out west, and then Gus McCauley called me and wanted me to play in Brampton the next year. So I went back east and played in Brampton. And then after that, I said, I just can't do this anymore. That was my aha moment when my wife slapped me on the side of the head and said, "You got a job out there.
Work
Get your
for
feet,
lacrosse.
back out there, and it's time to settle down." And that's shortly after. That's what happened. So. Yeah,
Time,
it's all of that. I mean, the Jimmy Watsons and the Johnny Grants, we all had the same experiences.
time's flying us. I really want to get into the 78 team and the gold medal
Yeah,
thing in the field. How did this come about? Who contacted you? And I know from having a few of the guys on the show, you guys were box guys, had no idea the rules. You guys actually had Roy Simmons Jr. Come in and
yeah,
explain rules to you guys to
yeah.
try and get the feel of this thing. So how did this all come about?
Roy was a big help, and we all needed it. I was out west. Dougie Hayes, myself, Danny Wilson, Durante, all came from the west. And there were weekends where we'd fly out on Friday night on the midnight flight, get into Toronto 7:30 in the morning with the time change, jump
Hmm.
on the bus. They'd be waiting for us there at the airport, and we head down to state or somewhere to play 2 games. We'd play Saturday and we'd play Sunday, and then we'd go back to the airport in Toronto, and the four of us would fly back out here and go to work Monday morning. And somebody would say, "What'd you do for the weekend?" And I would say, nothing." And so we did that for 4 weeks or 6 weeks in a row, and that was our training camp. The other guys had some workouts around Toronto. Um, they basically picked the four of us to play, and I think because I played for Gus McCauley the year before in Brampton, and we
Hmm.
won back there and came out and played my old team, the Burharts, in the Man Cup. So between refereeing and playing, I was in like 9-man cups, and so all of that in '78 became. We left our team, of course, when we'd go away on the weekend. We'd miss some games, and then we were gone for 2 weeks of the tournament. So, it was nice of the Burrards. Dougie Hayes and I were both on the Burrards, and
Hmm.
Durante and I guess I don't know if he was a New West End or Coquitlam, and Danny Wilson was he was just a young guy, probably played junior, but he was an excellent lacrosse player. So, and he played some field. So those guys that had played down in the States on scholarships were at a premium because Cochran and all those guys did
Hmm.
that. So they helped us learn as well. But it all came about bang, just like that. We're going back for these mini camps and we're play 2 games, and I'm not sure we learned a lot doing that. We most often, I think, lost on Saturday, but we turn around and win on Sunday because we would figure out how to do something different and keep the ball, for example. And then when we got into the tournament over there, we really were at a point where we were comfortable as lacrosse players. We were all good players. We
Hmm.
didn't have any trouble catching and passing and doing all that. It was a strategy of how to play field that we never really, even today, totally absorbed as much as if we would have been playing it all the time. And at the end of the day, I clearly remember sitting around in the hallways at the Manchester University after getting beat 28-4. And I don't even know how we got 4 goals, but we got beat 28-4, and we sat around there thinking, what are we going to do? Like, we got to play these guys again. We were ready to go, and we thought that we were going to go out and I'm not sure if any of us could honestly say, we thought we were going to win, but I mean, we got beat so bad the first game that, like I said, I'd want to know who was brave enough to actually buy champagne that we had in the dressing room, because after the first game, it wouldn't seem that would have been necessary. But I don't know, maybe we got it from the Americans. But in any event, the whole thing just unfolded, and we decided, like Bobby Allen said, we're just going to keep the ball, play Peterborough lacrosse. And if we have the ball, they're not going to score on us. And I think there was a bit of that involved in terms of the mentality of slowing the game down. Let's not try and play field. Let's play the game that we're good at. And so, that's, I think, more than anything, the reason that it was even close. And then you give guys like Cockerton or French or Wasson, those guys, the ball near the net. And in the size of that net, they'll put it in. That's all we needed. We just didn't need to be making mistakes that we had made against the best team in the world in the final game. And so we cut down on our errors, and there were obviously some penalties and goals and power plays and all of that stuff. But, honestly, if we were to play those guys 100 times, they would win the other 99. It was just one of those things that happened in sport,
That was that Team Canada moment again that we're talking about with the Soviets.
Everything it was, and it was emotion. It was courage. It was never say die. Yeah, some of the guys were playing with wooden sticks still, when it was raining. And I mean, Johnny Grant would sleep with his stick. He would never take his stick out in the rain. But that's sort of what we had to do to play the game. And with leadership, he kept us all together.
Right. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to remiss on this story, is the Huntsville reunion. I ran into Duffy McCarthy at Man Cup, and we were talking about the 2019 Huntsville reunion. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because that was amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely. All the footage, just to see the elation of all you guys getting together again.
When we started that, like I said before, it started as a 70th party for Al Gordonier, and then Duffy got a hold of it. And I had a mailing list, because we had a reunion a couple of years before that for our Quebec team. So he says, "Can you help me? Because I'm not that good at all of that stuff." I said, "Sure, I can do what I can." And I started getting hold of guys. And Duffy organized all the food, and I went back a little bit early and helped him. We ran around town. There was a golf game the next day, and he had all kinds of accommodation at his place, and it was in the middle of the summer. So, we had an overwhelming response, and everybody from Morley to Bobby Allen, Johnny Davis, Groucho McNeil. Some of the guys weren't even in the league. Groucho didn't play; he was out in Victoria at that time. But everybody was more than welcome, and there were guys with tears in their eyes when we went through all of that, and laugh. And Brampton guys, St. Catharines guys, Peterborough guys, Mississauga, I mean, from everywhere there were players, and we're planning another one out here in Victoria for next fall. And there's a whole bunch of guys. Rick Dudley wants to come, and Groucho wants to come out because he played in Victoria. So, what are we waiting for is the message. When you hear about Pat Baker, or even, last winter, I mean, I had a heart attack in January, and I was, in the hospital 7 weeks and open heart surgery. I'm fine now. But you know what? Nothing's promised to any of us about tomorrow. Right. So, I mean, what are we waiting for? So I'm lucky as I can be to still be here, but I'm not saying that for any reason. I'm just saying that, when you get right down to it, what are we waiting for? So if we can have a reunion, and I don't care if you played anywhere, you're welcome to come to this lacrosse reunion that we're going to have next year. But the one at Duffy's was special because it grew to a point where, I mean, it was different generations of the game, from Bobby Allen to Morley Kells to, Groucho, and all of these guys that really had been in some form of a relationship lacrosse-wise for decades. And so it was probably the one last time that guys got to see each other. Some of the guys have passed on since then, but what a wonderful time it was. And it was just something that we should probably try to do more of if we can.
Oh, I agree. I really want to thank you for taking the time. This was one of the quickest hours that we've had in memory. It's just amazing in some of the stories and things. But like I told you off air, one of my MOs is in order to grow the game, we have to know where we came from, and all the guys that paved the road for the guys that are doing it now. And I really want to thank you. And it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to talk with you.
Gary and Frank, thank you both. This has been fun. And it's the kind of thing that it's in all of us, this game. And it's one of those things that you're right. I mean, everybody comes from somewhere. And I've got nothing but respect for everybody that's involved.
Yeah, I want to thank you, too, as being on. And it's always nice to pick your brain. And it's amazing how we went sideways on this episode, where we went across sports and across different types of things.
A lot of ground to cover, and there's lots more of that.
Oh, yes.
We got into the weeds, and there's plenty of weeds left.
That's right.
Gary, thanks for doing this. Pat Differ, it's been a real pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for doing this.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks again.
All right, for Gary Groob and Hall of Famer Pat Differ, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching NLL Lacrosse Talk, seen live Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For lacrosse talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next Thursday at 4.